delivered in schools. It's only been getting delivered in schools statutory since 2021. Virginity testing hasn't actually become statutory yet. It becomes statutory in September 2026, this September coming. It's virginity testing and hymenoplasty. So hymenoplasty is within this session as well, even though it's not actually within the session's title. So when we're going to schools, we do obviously get a lot of schools asking for FGM just because they don't really want to deliver it themselves. So we go and deliver it for them. Sometimes it's classroom based, sometimes it's assemblies, just whichever is better for the actual school. To be honest, it doesn't really make that much difference as to whether it's in a classroom or whether it's an assembly, because you don't, or in kind of my experience, you don't really get that much conversation out of the students anyway. It's not something really that a lot of them, have massive discussions about. This is the one really where it is more us talking and giving them information rather than doing different activities and things around it. I did do this assembly yesterday. I think it is really important to do a little bit of pre-work with them before they do this session, purely because the school that I was in yesterday hadn't pre-warned anybody that they were doing this session. I think a letter had gone home, but that was about it. There was no sort of real conversations about it. Within that school, I had 3 people faint and 6 people leave, which was a record. But I think it is really important that some pre-work is done, so it's not just a case of they're coming straight into this. I don't think it really helped the fact that it was first thing on a Monday morning, and it was obviously the first thing Monday morning after the big England match. So I think a lot of them were also tired, and so I think it is kind of really thinking about when you deliver it and who you deliver it to. And yeah, like I said, doing a little bit of that pre-work, so it isn't just a case of it's just an add-on lesson that you think, oh well, yeah, we've been told we've got to do this session, but we'll just stick it in there. There has got to be a little bit of thought behind where you do it and when you do it. So what we do with the students in the room is we baseline them. This is when we do it in classrooms. We do baseline them. We ask them, if they know what it means, if they know what it stands for, or anything like that. We just ask them to be honest. It's not a test. So if, we just want to know what it is that they already do know. We'll then have conversations with them while they're filling this in. We'll go around and look how they're filling it in. And then, we will have discussions about what they think it means, anything else that they know about it, just to kind of get that gauge. In my experience, they don't really know that much. If at all, they probably know what FGM means if they've done, anything around this in like RE or anything like that. They'll generally know what it means, but other than that, they don't really know anything other than that. They're not really thinking about the ins and outs of what FGM actually is. One thing I do explain to the young people when we go in is we're teaching them this as though they are a potential ally rather than a potential victim, just to kind of distance it slightly for them, for everybody, even though there may potentially be potential victims within school. We do kind of distance it, and we do go against more allyship than anything else. We also say, obviously, they might not think that this is anything to do with them, but actually they don't know who they're going to be in 10 years' time. There might be a social worker, there might be a doctor, there might be a friend of somebody that's had this done to them, whether they decide to share that or not. But they do need to kind of have some empathy around, what it is and what somebody has gone through. When I'm training this to the staff, I do kind of link this very much to things like when we're talking about baby loss. We're talking about, it might not happen to you, but you do need to know the ins and outs of, if it happens to somebody else, what it is that they've potentially gone through, and thinking about ways in which that they might tackle that conversation if that conversation ever came up, or different words that may be used and things like that. They might be telling them that this has happened, but telling them in a roundabout way rather than saying, I've had FGM done to me, because that's a very hard thing as a victim to be able to just come out with and say. So we do have conversations around that as well. We also talk about what it is and why we're talking about it in school. Like I said, we do kind of do the distancing techniques. A lot of people believe that FGM is to do with certain religions. So, we do kind of quash that as soon as possible within the lessons. It's a cultural practice, not a religious practice. We also mention the fact that no religion in the world mentions it in any of their holy books. So, we kind of do dispel that myth as soon as we can, really, so that we can carry on the conversations around it being culture-based rather than being religious-based. We also talk about it when we're saying, this only happens in certain areas of the world. It absolutely doesn't. The latest statistics for you, and we do share these with the children as well, is 137,000 women and girls live with the consequences of FGM in the UK. 230 million worldwide have already been victims of FGM, and 60,000 girls under 15 are classed as being at risk of FGM that are living in the UK. And then worldwide, FGM practices are carried out on approximately 4 million young girls every year. 50% of those are females under the age of 5. And that's coming from the World Health Organization of those statistics. The UK statistics are coming from the NHS. So the big numbers, a lot of people think, oh, this hardly happens. Why we're talking about it? It happens to millions of people, every single year. So it is something that we definitely do need to talk about, especially when we look at things like immigration and things. People do not stay in certain countries anymore. Everybody moves everywhere. So it is something that is, it is happening in the UK. It's happened to people that are coming to the UK. So looking at those numbers, the chances that somebody is going to come into contact with somebody that has had FGM done to them or knows of somebody is actually, it's really, really high. So then we go into what actually does FGM stand for. Like I said, quite a lot of the time, some people in the classroom know what it stands for, but they don't really know anything other than that. And they haven't really kind of thought beyond that. So then it's the partial or total removal of the external female genitals or any other injury to female genital organs for non-medical reasons. This is generally as well where we kind of talk about other words that are used for FGM. So other words that we're using that are used in the clips and things that we used is the gudnine, and that means the female circumcision. So this is kind of really the ideal place, really, when we're looking at different vocab as to what the difference is between female circumcision and male circumcision. And we talk about the fact that, when a male is circumcised, it might be to do with religious practice or cultural practice. It might be done for medical reasons. But the very difference is the mutilation. It's the fact that men have it done, and when they've had it done, everything still works the way it should do. Everything, there is no after pain afterwards, and it's very much the fact that we do look at the fact that it's the mutilation part of it that is the illegal part of it, and why it's done to girls, and the difference between that and why it's done to boys. We do often then get a lot of things of, but I don't know anybody that it's happened to. So we look then at where it happens in the world and who it happens to, and why it happens. So the world map then shows there's at least 92 countries around the world that it happens. There is this misconception that it only happens to Africans in Africa. So then we kind of look at, it's not linked to a particular skin color. It's not linked to a particular religion. It's not linked to a particular area of the world. And we look at, there is only one continent in the whole world that doesn't have records of it, and that's Antarctica. And it's very much linked to, people move around the world. It might have been, 1,000 years ago, it was only linked to a certain area of the world. That is certainly not the case anymore. So we kind of look at the map and see how what's happening with that. In 2024, there was over 6,500 cases of FGM seen within the NHS. So again, it's big numbers. One of the things as well that we find is when we do have victims coming forward, we've had a lot more victims come forward in the UK since we've started delivering it in schools. And we kind of have the conversations with the students of education is key. you know, it's key to people having the you know, having the ability and having the resources to be able to say that it's happened to them. But it's also education is the one thing that is eventually going to help to stop it. And we, you know, we kind of interweave that within the whole thing, the whole way through the session. Then we go into what actually happens. Some schools do want us to show this, show the diagram. Some schools prefer us not to. It's completely, you know, it's completely up to them. We do tell them what happens, but again, it's up to them whether they want us to actually show the picture or not. I personally don't think there's anything wrong with the picture, but obviously it's completely up to schools as to whether we show it or not. For you, then there are three different types of FGM. So there's the removal of the clitoris. We do explain to these students as well at this point that the clitoris is where all the nerve endings are. The clitoris is also where the blood goes to when the clitoris has, you know, when the clitoris has been touched. It's a little bit like, depending on the age group that we're delivering to, we liken that to when a man's penis gets erect. It gets erect because of the nerve endings, and it fills with blood. That's exactly the same as what a clitoris does during any kind of intercourse or any kind of you know, any kind of touching in that area. So if that is then removed, then there is a case, you know, there is a chance of the girl bleeding out and things like that. The second form of FGM is removing the clitoris and the labia minora, which is a small flaps of skin that cover the vaginal hole. And then the third one is the narrowing of the vaginal opening. So that's literally where the vaginal opening is then sewn closed, so that there is only a very small hole left. It's really important that we kind of link what FGM is and the different types of FGM. So then when we're looking at different after effects and things, we can link back very clearly to this slide. Then we show them a clip. And I explained to them, obviously, I cannot tell them the story as a victim because I am not a victim. And there is only so far with learning and with empathy that I can actually go. So I always tell them it's really important that we actually do hear from a victim themselves as well. And, you know, they can kind of go through it in their own words. The best person I've ever found that does anything at all like this is Layla Hussein. She does TED Talks. That she's got loads and loads of different clips within YouTube and things that, you know, there are loads and loads to choose from. She's also got full documentaries. So if you knew this was coming up, maybe that's one that you could watch, or you could get the teachers that are delivering it to watch as well, just to kind of get things from a survivor's point of view. She's really articulate and she really kind of comes across with it. So this one it's not a very long. I'm not going to show it today. It's really easy to find on YouTube. But there's this one, but then there's also another clip which is brilliant, but we don't really show it in sessions anymore because the sessions just aren't long enough. But it's one where she actually sits down with her mum and asks her mum why she put her through it. You know, and it's very much, it shows the key to education, you know, and what education looks like, because a lot of the time it's really hard for the kids to kind of empathize of, well, if it's so bad, if Layla's mum struggled so much, why did Layla's mum then put Layla through it? And it's kind of really kind of embedding, you know, if it's something that's been going on and it's a tradition that's been going on within that particular family or that particular culture for, you know, for hundreds of years, it's just something that is done, you know, and it's very much, you know, it's kind of ingrained within them that this happens, and that is a really kind of abstract thing for the students to grasp. So yeah, so Layla does obviously, she kind of talks about it a lot better than anybody that's, you know, that's never had it done would ever be able to. So I really do kind of advocate for clips and you know, to really do your homework and to look at different ways of other people talking about FGM, not just you stood at the front of the room. So yeah, Layla is a fan favorite for me. Then we look at the long and short-term effects. You can't see it on this screen, but I do ask the students to kind of think about things first and come up with a list of their own. The ones that they never sort of really think about is the difficulty urinating and the incontinence. Most of the time they do come back with PTSD and depression. They never really mention flashbacks, and they never really mention anything about constant pain or difficulty having sex. So they kind of get the basic ones, but then obviously it's really good then to kind of give long and short-term effects kind of across the board. So the abnormal bleeding, obviously that can happen during the procedure itself, but it can also continue happening later on in life. The difficulty having sex, we kind of link that to the fact of, you know, if they've had the vaginal opening sewn up, then absolutely it can be difficult with having sex then, but also the intimacy side of it. You know, if they've had this happen to them when they were young, it might be that actually they've got long-lasting mental health issues around anybody being around their genitals. You know, and the linking of that to pain and things. So it's not just the physical side of difficult having sex, it's also the mental side of it. The depression, the flashbacks, like I said, they generally mention that anyway, so we kind of just look at that from the student's point of view and let them give their ideas across. The blood loss, we link that back to the original of what actually happens, and looking at the clitoris and looking at the fact that young women can bleed out. You know, we look at the fact that it is an illegal practice. And if a girl does start to bleed out, what are the chances that they would then take her to a hospital? We look at then, depending on how they're coping with it, coping with the actual topic itself, we kind of tend to look at how they're dealing with it as to how deep into it we will go. Because then we talk about things like what happens in the UK with like hotel rooms are booked out, or, you know, it's generally a lot of girls all at once that are having this done. We look at different instruments that, you know, that might be used, who the doctors are and things like that. Then we look at the life-threatening issues in childbirth. Childbirth and pregnancy is usually one of the main places as well where FGM is actually discovered. Because obviously that woman then will start going to the doctors and start having internal exams and things like that, and that's usually a lot of the time when the doctors figure out that somebody has had FGM done to them. So obviously it's a case of, if that woman has been sewn up, then if she hasn't been going to the hospital, what we find as well is when she does go into delivery of that child then gets stuck, because obviously they can't then come out the natural way because there's no physical way of them getting out. I did have one boy who turned around and go, well, why can't they just pull it back up again and then bring it, you know, to have a cesarean? You know, it's very much, you can't do that, you know, that's, and it's looking at all those different things. This is generally the sort of the slide where you're going to start getting questions and you're going to start getting the things of misconceptions coming up. So I do spend a lot more time on this slide really than any of the other slides. We then look at the difference, but, you know, the infections, linking that to, you know, where it's carried out, how it's carried out, things coming up afterwards, you know, things to do with scarring and healing and all the rest of it. But the one that they never kind of really think about is the difficulty urinating and the incontinence. And I think that has got a lot as well to do with a lot of people don't know the female anatomy, and they don't realize where it is that you wee from. They just presume, well, you wee from the hole, and if the hole's still got, you know, a little bit of an opening, then you're fine. And I think a lot of the misconception then comes from, actually, you don't just wee out of your vagina, you wee out of, you know, it's a completely separate hole. And actually, if the stitches have gone over that hole, then, you know, it does make it very difficult to wee. Or, you know, if when they've cut down there, they've gone through any kind of nerve endings or anything like that, then that's where the incontinence can come in. So again, there's lots of misconceptions about, but it's not really about FGM, it's about the female anatomy, where that one kind of, you know, that one kind of comes up. So you do have to go into a little bit more detail with that one as well. And then obviously the constant pain. I do link that one back to as well. One of the things that Layla says within the documentary that we show is when her mum had FGM done to her, she actually had to go back and have it done a second time. Because a neighbour of theirs had said that they hadn't cut enough away because she was riding a bike too quickly. So they're expecting, well, you're not in enough pain, so enough wasn't taken away. So we link it very much back to the clip as well, and to, you know, to what happened with Layla. And it's not just constant pain of physical, it's the constant pain as well of mental pain, of the people that would be organising this, and the people that, might be taking you to the, to have it done. And Layla said she was pinned down, and it's the kinds of people that are pinning you down. She was 7 when she had it done, and the people that were pinning her down were the people that she trusted most in her life, that had never, she said she had a good family home, she loved her mum to pieces, she loved her dad to pieces. This was the one thing where she couldn't let it go, because she trusted it, she trusted her parents, she trusted her grandparents and her aunties and her uncles and things, but this was the one thing that she couldn't forgive them for, and she never quite forgave them for. And then we go into how can we stop it. One of the things that we talk about within this as well is why people don't report it. So, one of the things that we'll talk about is the fact that people don't report it because a lot of the time when it's done when you are young, you just presume everybody's had it done. And it's just, it's not something, it's not a question that you really ask, and to try bring a bit of, humor back into the room at this point. I always go around and say, we don't all go around looking at each other's bits. So, it's not a case of, you would notice that not everybody has it done, and it's not something that up until a couple of years ago we weren't even talking about in school anyway. So a lot of survivors just presume, well, I just presumed this happened to everybody, that's what I was told, kind of thing. So we go into that side of it. The other reason that a lot of people don't report it, that we've asked, and lots of research has gone into it as well, is they don't want their loved ones going to prison. So we do spend quite a lot of time on that as well. The fact of what happens if you do report it, and the stages of going through what happens when you report it, and the fact that education always comes before prosecution, always. So, it's a case of, if you did ring the police for yourself or for somebody that you thought, might be in imminent danger, it's not a case then of that, the parents would then be hauled away into, and go to prison. You'd never see them again. The investigation would then start. And once education has started with the police, if the parents or whoever it is that's organising the FGM is educated enough that they go, do you know what, absolutely, we won't do it. We didn't realise it was an illegal practice. It's something we've done in our, in our family, in our culture for generations. Then we won't do anything. Then absolutely no further action is taken. They are kind of assessed ongoing, just to make sure that there is going to be no threat. But then as soon as it's a case of there is no threat, they are then completely left alone. The prosecutions would come if they were educated that this is an illegal practice worldwide, and they then still attempted to carry on. Then yes, that is when prosecutions would happen. And prosecutions don't just happen to the people that are organising it. It can be by proxy as well. So it could be a case of, if you're paying for the flight tickets for a family member to go over, then, prosecutions can happen with that as well. If you're doing your research into it, you will realise that actually, when we're looking at prosecutions and we're looking at investigations, there are not many prosecutions that are actually happening. With regards to prosecutions versus how many people this is happening to, it is a very small amount, but we don't generally go into that too much with the students. When we go into looking for statistics to do with virginity testing, you can't find any, because there isn't any, because it's an underground kind of thing that happens. So there isn't really any statistics for virginity testing and hymenoplasties. So we can kind of just tell them the facts of what we do know, rather than trying to tell them, but if this does happen to you, there's going to be no fallout for the people that do it. We don't kind of go into that with them. We just tell them, for a lot of people, they are scared that if they do say something, then they're never going to see the parents again, and we come into it from that side of, it really is important that you do report it. Then we go into virginity testing and hymenoplasty. We do kind of do a little bit of a vocab check first, that they understand what a hymen is and they understand what it means to be a virgin. And then I kind of look at the hymen and kind of describe the hymen depending on when we do it, as being when they, in science, when they look at an onion skin underneath a microscope, you know how thin they are, and then kind of link and say, and a hymen is about 100 times thinner than that, you know, so they can kind of have an idea. Because a lot of people, when, you know, when you just say hymen, they think it's a really quite a thick piece of skin. So, you know, we kind of give them a bit of, you know, it is so thin that it's not really, you can't really see it very easily. Then we show them different clips. The clip that we use just shows the difference between twins in a family. One is male, one is female, and looking at the difference between how they grow up and how they develop, and the difference between being a male and a female in, you know, in quite a close-knit family that would potentially be carrying out virginity testing. Again, we look at the fact that it's not religion based, it's cultural based, and you know, it's family to family based. You know, it's not linked to any particular religion at all. We do also tell them that virginity testing only became illegal in 2022, as with hymenoplasties. When I was looking for different clips to be able to use within the classrooms, if you ever try to do it and you go onto YouTube, there are more advertisements for it than there are against it still, even on YouTube. You know, there are still advertisements for this happening in places like Harley Street and things, because they're old videos. So a lot of people that aren't looking at dates and things like that might not even realize that it is an illegal practice now. So then, yeah, so we kind of look at her and, you know, what her ideas are, as, you know, as to what happens with her in her family, just because she's a girl. We look at the different effects of if somebody is prepared to carry out virginity testing on her because she's a girl, just before she gets married, what else might happen to her because she's labelled as, you know, as the female in the family. And we're looking at different things like, you know, she'd be told that she has to do what her husband tells her, and, you know, and different things like that. So we're looking at, you know, we're not just looking at it from virginity testing, we're looking at it from, you know, how women are seen in certain cultures, and, you know, how they're treated in certain cultures. So we very much link it to that as well. And then we give them a bit of an activity to go with that clip. And the activity is basically just a chance for them to discuss different things with each other. This is obviously not as intense as the FGM. So, you know, it is giving them a bit of a chance to take a breather, have a bit of a talk. When we're doing that with them, we can then kind of go around the classroom and listen to what it is that they're saying. A lot of the time they do go back to talking about FGM as well. So, you know, it's where you can kind of pick up different misconceptions and things like that as well. And then just kind of gauge where their understanding is at that point. If we do that sort of 5-10 minutes towards the end of the session, we've then still got time to be able to then quash any of the misconceptions that they do still have. And then we also then, like with all the other sessions, we give them the chance to ask anonymous questions. We generally don't get them within this session. It's not really a session where, you know, where they're wanting to ask questions, but we do make sure that we spend more time on this session than many of our others on the signposting, because obviously we don't know who's in that room. You know, we don't know who's in that session. You know, it's a case of, if you need help, this is absolutely where you would get that help from. We do link to Karma Nirvana, very much so. Karma Nirvana is also mentioned in Layla's clip, and it's also mentioned in the virginity testing clip. So it's a very prominent charity for you know, people who are, you know, who have been victims of different things, such as the hymenoplasty, virginity testing, and the FGM. We also then link them to school and say, you know, you absolutely can speak to anybody at school. We do kind of explain to them that if they do say something at school, then it would be a case of that school member would automatically ring 999 or 101, depending on how it is that they've told them or what it is that they've told them, you know. And it's a case of, it's a very different scenario to normal safeguarding. And then we also link them to the NSPCC as well. And that's kind of it. So it's not an easy session to take part in. It's not an easy session to deliver, but it is an important session to deliver. Like I said, you know, most young people that you are teaching this to will never potentially be a victim, but you don't know that, you know. So, and like I said, you don't know, you know, who the potential victims are, but you also don't know who they're going to be dealing with as they get older, you know. So it is very much, you know, it is a really important session, but you know, obviously education is key. So yeah, but it's not easy, and a lot of people I know will not go anywhere near it, which is why we then do it instead. So that's it. Does anybody got any questions? Any anonymous questions anywhere?